We're live.
Let's go.
Thank you for taking the time out of your day to do this podcast. I appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a laugh. We don't have to edit the whole thing out.
Hopefully there's some useful parts.
Hopefully we can use some of it. But as I say to each guest, come on, I think it's great for everybody because we've had a chat before. You know, I know yourself. I guess many people that follow you on LinkedIn and things and other mediums that you have know yourself. But for people that don't, if you could give like a synopsis of said self.
Yeah, that's fine. So my name's Emma Banks and I have recently set up my own independent business called Wellbeing Wise Derby. Prior to that, I worked many, many years ago for the NHS as an assistant psychologist. I've always been really passionate about mental health, but especially around learning disabilities and special educational needs. My mum was a mental health learning disability nurse for her whole career, basically. So that's where the kind of passion started, I think. So I did that for a year, and then I was working primarily with adults. But then a lot of the times it felt that much of the kind of trauma or difficulties or, you know, the issues that they were facing could often be traced back to a lack of support, a lack of understanding in childhood. So I started looking for positions within schools, not from a, teaching background, but from more, I want to support young people at an early age to get the support that they need so that they don't end up in adult services. So luckily I applied for a job at a secondary special needs school in Derby, and they were brilliant because they took a massive leap of faith taking me. I'm not a counsellor or psychologist. I've just got my undergrad degree and a lot of experience because I've always worked in like care homes and things like that. So yeah, I worked as initially a lead for therapies, I think it was called, the title, and then we moved to staff and student wellbeing, which eventually became senior lead for mental health within the school. And I was there for almost 14 years. And then, left. And this year is my new venture.
Ta-da. Ta-da. To date. Great stuff. So if we can rein it back a little bit and kind of talk about how you made the decision to start your career and how, where it went from there. Because we've given the short synopsis.
Yeah.
But assistant clinical psychologist?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where did that come from? There's a million roles to take. What I really like asking people is, what made you pick that one? What was your motivations? What was your passion behind it? Or did you fall into it? Or
I guess part of it when I was at college and obviously doing my A-levels, and psychology was one of my A-levels, and history. I like history as well. And I really enjoyed picking arguments apart, if that makes sense. So with psychology, when there's a theory, it's looking for evidence to support that, but also let's look at the evidence that contradicts that. And I like the fact that there's no firm answer.
Okay.
That suits me because then I can find evidence to back up things, but I can also find evidence to challenge things. And after college, I decided to do psychology at university, and I really wanted to do clinical and forensic psychology. They were my passions and interests, mostly from like the research and the academia side of things. But then as I got into it, and I spent a lot of time with my mum, like I say, who was a learning disability nurse. And I really wanted to kind of understand better because when I was growing up, there was still a lot of judgment. I mean, I still think there is to this day, but there was a lot of judgment, and people with learning disabilities, difficulties, things like autism, the breadth of special educational needs, really, it was quite hidden. Like people with these disabilities weren't as included. They weren't in the mainstream kind of society. And I found that interesting. Like, why would we would exclude a whole kind of characteristic, really? And looking at better ways. So when I first got into working part-time, I would work in acquired brain injury units as a healthcare assistant. And I worked in a long-term learning disability institution which obviously they've all closed down now. But at the time, there was an institution here in Derby that I worked at as a healthcare assistant, and seeing how those systems worked and seeing what they were called patients then and how they'd ended up there and some of the horrific things that had happened to them. For instance, I worked on a ward where some of the patients didn't have any teeth. And I said, oh, is that because of like dental hygiene? Had they had issues with the teeth? Oh, no, they were biters, so they had the teeth taken out. So things like that, for someone like me, that stirs a real, like, I can't believe this happened. Why did we not look at things like why that person was biting? For me, it's always the why. As we know now, all behaviour communicates. Why were they doing those things? Surely there was a better way. We know now, obviously, there are far better ways. So I think that's kind of I'm very nosy. And I just want to understand the why, but understand the why for a reason. So why are they doing this? So then we can try X, Y, Z. So making people's lives better, I guess is.
I'm just trying to assimilate the fact that you work somewhere and at the time they took someone's teeth out because they were biting people. That's insane.
Obviously, they didn't take them out while I was there. It was a historic thing that had happened.
In the past, somebody took their teeth out because they bit them, or
like women that had forced hysterectomies, so they didn't have to deal with their menstrual cycles. So,
have they been closed down for good reason?
They were closed down as part of that kind of inclusion and community. So the one that I worked at, it closed down, and the kind of support for these patients became service users. The terms are always changing, aren't they? Became service users, and different charities or organisations would put in tenders for their support, and they were moved into homes like me and you live in within the communities, but they were all broken up and split up. Yeah. And yes, I completely agree they should be part of the community and they should be fully included. But I actually wrote my dissertation at university on the transition from institutionalised to community care from the staff perspective, not from the patient perspective, because that's so much harder ethically and GDPR and confidentiality, all that. So I did it from the staff perspective, because actually staff well-being, the communication with staff, there were so many changes, and actually the staff that I spoke to, a lot of their colleagues actually died, which was scary. But it turns out there was asbestos and loads of other things in the institutions where they'd been for years and then coming out of them, and there was lots of different reasons. But yeah, it was just interesting looking at that transition from one that the institution had been their home. That was all they'd ever known. A lot of them were in there from childhood. You know, it was a big part of their lives, and such a huge change. And, you know, now I know things like, you know, social stories, visuals, supporting a transitional object, you know, all that sort of support that we would put in and understanding around such a big transition. It just wasn't there. It was, right, we're closing and you've moved into this house.
How important is it to gear up children with special needs? And to be fair, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, children full stop need time to adjust. Am I right? But
Definitely.
It's just, would you say it's exasperated when you have special needs because of your needs?
Yeah, I think being aware that, you know, regardless of a special educational need or not, change is hard. We all struggle with change. I, as an adult, struggle with change, because part of that is that lack of control. You know, are things being done to me? Am I part of this change? Where do I fit in with all this change? But with children with special educational needs, it's not just things are changing. It's the anxiety that underpins that. And it's also remembering that change can be so subtle. It doesn't have to be a big thing like moving schools. It could be moving from one classroom to the next. It could be a different teacher coming in. It could be one activity to the next, one environment to the, you know, transition can be really quite subtle and quite small. And from my own kind of personal experience, I have a son who has special educational needs, and it's written into his EHCP that he needs up to 2 years to process a significant transition.
No way.
Because he really struggles.
2 years.
Up to 2 years. So when he moved from primary to secondary was a nightmare, because obviously local authorities, the way the EHCP system works, you don't get notified until February of the year that your child is going to be moving into a provision for that September. But because of the way the system is, that people were saying no to consultations, the schools were saying we can't meet need. There wasn't a school that had all the right bits in that could meet his needs. We had to look further afield. So it was more like May time by the time we had a school saying, yes, we can take him. So the intensity, we were driving up to that school every other day in the evenings after school. This is where you're going to be. We were showing him visuals. This is the placement that you're going to. So actually the work that goes into supporting a child with transition, it looks very different for each child. It's getting to know that child and what works for them. And sometimes I think when I use the term visuals, people think of symbols.
Yeah.
But visuals are so much more than symbols. So getting people on board with the idea of visual support, obviously. Yeah. But thankfully he is really settled and he's in a lovely school now. And we're really pleased with the progress he's making. And he is really coming on leaps and bounds with adjusting to transition.
2 years. 2 years. That's tough. And you don't get 2 years to gear up because you don't know your school. You don't always know your school before that, and you were looking for a school at the same time. So, okay. And then you went from assistant clinical psychologist to
strategic lead for staff and student wellbeing at a secondary special educational needs school.
Okay. And what was that like when you first walked through the door?
Terrifying. It was an eye-opener because I'd always worked with adults as well. Yeah. I'd never worked, I wanted to work with children, but I guess like most people will find working in education, the level of training and support you're actually given when it comes to working in those environments is next to nothing. And I know even now when people do their teaching qualifications, at university, the level of support that they have and input they have around special educational needs is next to nothing. It's minimal. More time will be spent on things like physical impairments, visual impairment, hearing impairment. The time spent on like neurodivergent conditions, neurodiversity is next to nothing. So yeah, when I walked in the door, I was like, okay. Luckily the staff were amazing. Don't get me wrong, my colleagues were amazing. The ethos of the school felt really aligned with my principles, with my values, and that was really important to me. It was student-centered, well-being first. If a child isn't regulated, they're not accessing learning anyway, so let's make sure children are regulated. But yeah, I think it was like the first or second day, a child picked me up. I just I didn't move because I'm quite thick set. I thought there's no chance this kid's shifting me.
Go for it.
We were doing a bit of intensive interaction. I was mimicking him. He was mimicking me. He charged at me and just literally lifted my feet off of the ground. But I had my hands free. So I was a bit like, hello. Can anybody help me? And this teacher came and was just like, oh, come on, put her down. And literally straight away just was like, all right. And then I think the next day I got a tennis ball to the head.
Yeah.
So, that was like, okay, know your place.
How did it differ from the institution environment? Because that was the biggest, I guess, intense role working with people that have a SEN. And then you go into this environment. How different is the level of care and how they're treated? Or is it just like, because it was a different time in your life as well?
Yes.
So how did time move forward as regards to how you saw they were looked after and stuff? I'm guessing all children had the teeth.
Yes.
Yeah. For example, do you know what I mean? It's just,
unless it was due to dental hygiene.
Yes. So when you saw children that may, bite from time to time, the techniques must be comparatively different.
Massively different. And, I wouldn't ever describe special needs settings as like institutions.
Exactly.
The inclusion ethos.
Yeah.
And that, see the child.
Yeah.
I really get frustrated by things like standardized assessments because for me, it's about a narrative around that child. Mm-hmm. And it all links back to what are your success criteria as well. So obviously within the institution, my role was as a healthcare assistant.
Okay.
The success criteria was getting people up, assisting them, but also the profile of the adults I was supporting in that setting were PMLD.
Yeah.
Whereas the school I was working at it was a vast profile, but we didn't have PMLD students.
Yeah.
So it would be your mild learning difficulties, autism, dyslexia, but we did also have a significant cohort with SEMH needs as well. So the profile was huge. We did have some severe learning disabilities.
Yeah.
So yeah, the profile was huge, and it really opened up my eyes to, you know, the different profiles, the different level of need, but also how bespoke you have to be in your approaches.
Yeah.
And really getting to know each child. And luckily, you know, when I first started at the school, there were about, I think it was 69 children on roll.
Yeah.
By the time I left, there was about 240.
No way.
So the demand
Yeah.
for special schools is just going through the roof.
Yeah.
But then for me, you're diluting the support that you're able to offer. Okay. You know, the school was really good at what it did because it felt like family.
Yeah.
It felt like a community. There were 3 staff, you know, maximum of 7 or 8 kids in a room, amazing ratios, but also because of the level of need of the students, it was right for them. And now you're getting to the point where you've got 14, 15 kids in a room with 2, maybe 3 staff. You know, your ratios are coming down. And actually, do we need to look at, that's why I always talk about the systems, you know, people working within them are absolutely trying their hardest.
Yeah.
And I think we have, unfortunately, this state where parents are pit against a school or staff within schools, but really it's the wider systems that need looking at. How do we support special educational needs? What's our inclusive agenda? What do we want it to look like going forward? Because the way that it's going isn't working.
Yeah. Okay. So it's more about changing the system than, you know, saying a school's not doing it right or a local authority's not doing it right. You're thinking, let's look further back and see how we can change it as a whole. Okay. What was it like when you finally got the opportunity to be, they're not preventative, but early stages of a child's development compared to working with adults? Like the different types of things they did, I'm guessing the therapies they would use and things like that, compared to more the care side in the adult sector.
Yes.
You know, how does it vary? And how unique is a child's care in SEN school? And I'm playing devil's advocate here for people that have maybe never worked in it, because so many people listening to this will have. But, you know, what's the difference? You know, because you get inclusion rooms and intervention rooms and all this type of stuff in mainstream schools as well, or you get a TA in a mainstream school to support a child or whatever, or, you know, a TA that just supports children in the mainstream, full stop. But how, like you say, how do they support a child individually, and how can it vary in one school?
It's so multifaceted.
Okay.
But it basically, I would argue from my perspective, it starts with having your whole school trained in proactive strategies, having your behaviour policy reflect your proactive approaches, because a lot of schools end up running reactively. So really working to identify at the moment a child has been named at your school, right? What does this child need? Also, what is success going to look like for this child? Because working in a special needs school, the one that I did, you know, GCSEs weren't offered. They're not on the table, because generally we had children that were around a minimum of 2 levels lower than age expected. So being really proactive, but also, you know, for a while we were near a mainstream secondary school. And I say it starts from the moment they walk through the door. So we have that recognition. How has that child coming to us in the morning? Have they had a taxi in? Have they had a chaotic morning? Has it been a busy morning? Has it been a noisy morning? You know, did they find all their uniform? What sensory triggers could they have had? Having that awareness of what their day has been like before they've even arrived within the school. So thinking, how can we regulate them, settle them in, and give them the best start. So our days would normally start with a, hey, morning, stop smiling. Try and make a joke, make them happy. You know, there were, especially during the winter, I used to love being out on the front, and me and my colleague would do a little bit of a dance on the front while we're waiting for all the taxis coming in. And it was just nice to see the smiles on their faces, as opposed to looking at some of our mainstream colleagues, which, don't get me wrong, some of them were morning, have a good day, but some were like tie, shoes, shirt, blazer. It's like that child has just stepped through your door and you're already, you know, monitoring the uniform policy. Let's get them in first. Those are conversations that can happen. How does a uniform affect a child's ability to learn? That's my personal opinion.
I'm not going to cast any comments.
No.
Because there's going to be arguments for and against in that.
There definitely will. But I just think, again, it's about what do you want for young people? I read something recently that said the education system as it is today was set up to educate factory workers. And we haven't really moved beyond that. We still get kids in, we sit them at desks, we talk at them, we expect them to pass tests, and then we send them off. Is that really what 21st society needs? How our careers have moved on, the sorts of industries that are available to young people now, but also thinking about children with special educational needs. How can we make careers accessible to them? Because the stats around young people with special educational needs, especially things like autism, it's scary. I think it's something like 16% of adults with autism are in full-time paid employment.
Oh, wow.
So thinking about, you know, talking about the system being broken and how we support young people with SEND, it's about being strengths-based and focusing on the strengths of a child. When you have a child with special needs, like I do, you are told all the time, all their challenges, all their deficits, all their disordered-based difficulties. I want you to know my son's hilarious. He's so funny. His memory for navigation and maps is insane. He knows the 2 windmills in Derby near Rainsway. He'll tell you which way they're facing every day. Southeast today, northwest. I'm like, wait, let me get a compass. He knows. He's got strengths. I'm not quite sure how we apply that yet to a career.
Well, he could do outdoor pursuits. He could work for PGL.
Yeah.
They do a lot of stuff like that. There's no reason why he wouldn't be able to do that. Well, I don't know any other challenges he may have had and other things, but you could, I don't know. I guess when I did PGL, not that I can remember that much, you did walks and stuff like that or whatever else. You do navigating with maps and stuff. I mean, that's using one skill, but that skill is also transferable.
Exactly.
Not just to say you can just do that one thing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
But instead of focusing on the fact that my child has all these other difficulties, let's focus on the strengths and how can we hone that? We used to talk about special interests, didn't we? And how can we use those special interests to engage them in their learning? But also let's think about what they're learning. Is it something that they are going to use and going to need? And is it aspirational? Because we still need aspirations for our kids. I don't want the bar lowering just because they have difficulties. I want you to acknowledge they have difficulties, but how are we going to get them where they want to be? So the difference for me between supporting a child with SEND and supporting a mainstream child is the flexibility and freedom that you should have to provide as much intervention, to be strengths-based, to really nurture that young person. But to be fair, like I've always said, I think that should be the approach for every child. Not different. If you used SEND-based approaches in a mainstream school, I think the levels of success, the levels of happiness, the attendance, which is obviously a big issue at the moment as well, would go up because the SEND approaches being, you know, student-centered, really focusing on their strengths, trying to encourage them, but also thinking things like sensory, environment, you know, movement breaks, all those sorts of things. Actually, could we not all benefit from those?
That's true. Okay, so you want to shake up the whole system?
Yeah, let's do it all.
Yeah, I guess, but it's a toughie, isn't it? Like the realm we're delving into, because it's kind of like, how do you mark that? How do you grade that? How do you create scores for that? How can Ofsted, if you're doing more vocational stuff, but I guess the idea, the counter argument, maybe that's what college is for. But I guess your argument is how do you explore what you can and can't do, what you want to do, what you don't want to do before college in order to pick something that's suitable.
Yes.
You know, and then they kind of harness that skill so you become a specialist, you know what I mean, in it. Is that kind of your thoughts of blending more real life, not work, but, yes, work, because that's the point of school, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a weird thought. When actually, I think of stuff like this sometimes, but like you think school is actually training you to go to work.
It's training you for a career. And, you know, you spend so much time at work. Let's not spend it being miserable.
Not that schools are.
No. Some schools are genuinely amazing. I walked into one yesterday and I heard one member of staff say, I just love coming here because it's like a white fluffy cloud room and it makes me feel good.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that's amazing. But then I've also, you know, the other issue is, you know, the environments, the buildings, how busy these schools are. I was in a mainstream secondary at the start of the week and there's over 1,000 students in these schools. Bells ringing, people moving around, you know, from a sensory perspective, it's overwhelming. And you just think, and then we're sending kids into these where it feels faceless. It feels like they're a number. And, you know, especially when they're moving around between the different staff and there's so much that could be changed, but it's whether we have the capacity for change, the want for change, and how far does that change need to go? Yeah.
And how do you resource it? But you're throwing ideas out there, not a structure to do it, because obviously
they're just ideas.
Yeah, there's a million different things that you need to consider. But if you don't start the conversation, then the process can't start. And also,
I'm not a teacher. I've never had to stand in front of a class. I did occasionally dabble with PSHE from the emotional health perspective and trying to support, especially around when we had like mental health awareness weeks, delivering assemblies, you know, whole school approaches around mental health. Definitely involved in that part. But I think the pressure that staff are under as well and the current curriculum, it's removed creativity from professionals. We don't trust professionals anymore because we make them stick to very strict schemes of work and these are your assessment criteria and this is what you must get taught and you must teach it in this very specific way. Where's you went to university to be a teacher, to, you know, share your passion and knowledge with kids. And, you know, my husband was a primary school teacher for years. And I loved watching him get all excited about preparing lessons. He used to love doing like the detective ones where he'd lay puzzles out across the whole school and he'd really go for it sort of thing. But then he would be quite unhappy a lot of the time because of the pressure around marking schemes and, you know, the schemes of work. And there's so much admin that goes into schools that he doesn't get to do the bit that he's passionate about. He loves working with the children directly, you know, imparting knowledge, sharing passion, getting them excited for learning. Science was his biggie as well. He loved doing the funny science experiments, the Van der Graaf and all that business. But yeah, and then, you know, there's droves of staff leaving education because they're not happy.
I keep saying this figure. I've said it on about 5 podcasts now, so it better be right, or I'm making a fact up here. It's about 30%, is it? Is it 40,000 or something leave a year or something? Them 2 figures could be completely wrong, by the way, but I think it's...
You said it with confidence.
I said it with confidence and conviction.
Let's go with it.
Yeah, so I think it's roughly speaking 30% of the current workforce leave a year. I should Google... Next time I'm going to Google it. So 30%... So 3, 6... I'm not a great mathematician, but over the period of 4 years, over 100% of the workforce has left.
Yeah.
And... it takes, if you're doing a BA, what's it like 4 years course?
Yeah.
So the time it trains...
3 years, then you top up with your QTS and everything else.
For example. So if it takes you 4 years to become a teacher, in that time you've become a teacher, 100% of the workforce has left. Yeah. See, that's a lot.
I think when he left, the stats were around, it said the average lifespan of a teacher is in their career, not their actual life. Was around
have you had much thought on... what could be done to change that? It's a big question to throw at you. I know you're not the education secretary.
No, it's not my fault.
It's sorry. Not your fault. But yeah, what's your take on it? Because it's a high number.
I think it's hard because both me and my husband have left education.
Yeah, okay.
And our reasons are different. Obviously, he was classroom based. I was not. But part of the reason is lack of autonomy.
Okay.
Micromanagement, passing down of the stress. You know, you need leaders that can manage their stress well, or seek support to help manage their stress so it's not passed down. if you're having a bad day, I always say that I've got quite high levels of professionalism. I could have had the worst morning in the world trying to get my kids up and ready for school, but I'll come into school, smile on my face, morning, let's go. And then it'll come back at the end of the day like, oh God, I've got to get back now.
Yeah.
But we're good actors, aren't we?
Yeah.
That's what you do working in education. You put on a show for the kids because you want them to have the best experience possible. But the downside of that being masking is exhausting.
Yeah. I always think that with teachers, and most teachers, all teachers that I've ever worked with, to be honest, are very positive people. And I think, is that a skill because you're in front and you've got to, I think someone said exactly what you said. It's like you're putting on a show all day for the children, regardless of how you feel. They've got to be the best version of yourself. You've got to motivate them to learn, and obviously show what somebody should be like at work at the same time, professional. Do you know what I mean? Treating each other with respect, managing a team, because you are managing them whilst you're there. Yeah. So what do you think the issues is with the staff not is it not regulating the level of stress, or would you say certain people in wrong positions, or just not having enough support, or what do you think where it stems from?
I think some of it comes down to we're good at talking the talk.
Yeah.
But we don't actually, a bit like me, I fully admit I don't practice what I preach.
We're all guilty for it, yeah.
We're very guilty of it. I'm very aware of self-care. And when I say self-care, it always gets a bit of oh, here she goes. But self-care isn't always hot baths and spa days. It can be a hot cup of tea without anybody bothering me. It can be, I like to, if I can, walk my kids to school. And then once I've dropped them off, I put my headphones on, I listen to the radio, and I walk back home ready to start my day for work. But that 20 minutes that I get walking alone, that's my self-care. It doesn't have to be these extravagant things. I think some people, when you say self-care, think, oh yeah, I bet she gets a massage every week. Or
oh, yoga, here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also think some of the kind of things within school. So, part of my role was staff and student wellbeing.
Okay.
So it's having those whole school approaches to wellbeing. Let's actively monitor. You say we do. Be transparent, fully transparent about what's going on for the school, because people will jump to their own conclusions. If you're not going to communicate with them, they'll draw the worst possible conclusions.
Yeah.
Looking at things like your workload policy, communications policy, I think is a massive one. Mm-hmm. I've always put on the bottom of like my email, this email is sent at a time convenient to me. There is no expectation for you to respond outside of your working hours.
Let me jump into that one if I can, because I've seen this quite a lot and I really like it.
Yeah.
But I think, do you not think it's ironic? Because I've had people email me at 8 o'clock at night and I'm thinking, 1 minute.
Yeah, why are you working?
You just told me not to respond to this and you emailed me. And I do like it. And I think it's a really positive thing because you don't feel pressure to respond.
And that's what it is. It's taking the pressure off. And some of us, some people say you must only work between these hours, but that doesn't work for all of us. And especially when you're a parent, I might decide to down tools at 3:30 so I can support my kids. But actually, once we're into our evening or once they're in bed, I might go, right, now's my time for focus.
Yeah.
And that works for me. Yeah. But what we shouldn't be doing is saying, you must, I expect you. I emailed you last night. Why didn't you respond? Well, that wasn't my working time. I'm sorry.
I didn't know.
It's cooking tea.
Yeah, I didn't know it was that urgent.
Yeah, sorry.
So when your role evolved, what kind of new things did you learn about mental health as regards to children and adults? Because no doubt with your role changing, did you feel that the adults needed it more than the children, the staff or something? I don't know. Was there any surprises, or what was your approach, and what big things did you change and were you really proud of? That's a good one. I wanted to ask you that.
What am I proud of? There's so many things. I do think there's lots of different things. So part of it is I do believe that we as adults have a lot of power. Yeah. And the children are watching us. So actually, if we prioritise our well-being and self-care and, I often talk to parents as well, like verbalise your inner workings because they don't know what's going on. So model, my stomach feels tight, my chest is feeling a bit funny. I think I'm a bit worried. I think I'm a bit anxious about this deadline that's coming up or this work that I've got to do. But you know what? I'm going to have a cup of tea. I'm going to take some deep breaths and I'm going to make a list. Or I'm going to journal. or I'm going to spend some time in the garden and just do an activity that helps me, that I enjoy doing, because they're seeing what you're doing. So I think part of it is get it right for the staff. If your staff are happy, that filters down. A bit like stress filters down, happiness filters down. Share the joy, find the joy, look for the joy. You know, if you look for problems, you'll find problems. Look for joy, you'll find the joy. It works both ways. And then I think part of it as well is I spent a lot of time obviously doing mental health training for children and young people. You know, there's some great services and organisations in Derby City, where I'm based, like Bridge the Gap, and, you know, all the support that they're doing around Derby Cares and trying these new initiatives to get support around children and young people's mental health. What I find incredibly frustrating with the training and everything else is you're taught about risk and resilience factors and protective factors. In your risk factors, SEND is always on there. So we fully acknowledge that children with SEND are far more likely to develop mental health difficulties, yet professionals generally account mental health difficulties to their SEND. So they don't put in the mental health support. So you have a child with autism who's highly anxious. Yeah. They're highly anxious because they're autistic.
Oh.
So they don't need mental health support. They don't need help around their anxiety. They need help managing their autism.
Is this where people are seeing the need, not the person?
Yeah. And it's also the level to which it impacts that person. Because, yes, some things are inherent with different characteristics, different neurodivergent individuals might experience things differently. But what is the impact on that person? Yes, they might be, we might all have anxious times. We might all feel a little bit of anxiety, but we wouldn't say, I have anxiety.
It's a feeling.
It's a feeling.
Which will pass.
And it's letting them know it will pass. And again, that's why it comes to adults are important. Let's upskill the kids. But actually, when you've got a child who is crippled by their anxiety, does it matter if they're autistic or not? No. Give them the support. Teach them the strategies, neuro-affirming strengths-based strategies around managing their anxiety. Okay. So it doesn't come from a place of, well, you will struggle with that because you find X, Y, Z difficult. That's where we need to change things.
But you know what? I've never thought of it like that. But obviously, I've never needed to because of. I mean, but I should do as a person, even in the public, because we should be educated on accommodating people that have special needs. So yeah, I'm glad you've shared that actually. And so it's more people saying to children, "You've got anxiety because you've got autism," or that's just part of your autism. That's just is what it is.
It's not dismissive. It's invalidating.
Yeah. Okay.
And actually, the impact that has, you can enter that whole cycle of guilt and shame where you internalize so much of it. And then also it might prevent you from seeking support further down the line. Are we teaching these kids that their feelings are important? Yeah. And that there's no point in voicing it because they'll say it's because I'm autistic or because I'm dyslexic, because I've got ADHD.
Oh, because they're going to think this feeling's because I'm autistic. This is just my natural feeling rather than getting help to get out of it.
Yes. And I've worked with children before that go, it's all right, I know I find this hard because I'm a bit broken. And that, honestly, it really does. Because, you want to just grab the child and hug them like, you are not broken. The system is broken and adults have failed you. If that is how you're feeling, we've failed. We need to do better. If my child ever came, to be fair, he does often come home, bless him, and one of his phrases that he uses is, I'm a bad boy, I make bad choices. And when he says that, it's like, no, darling, you were dysregulated because of X, Y, Z, whatever's gone in the day. You are a good boy, you make good choices, and we can help you. Yeah. And we can start again tomorrow.
He's just clung to that phrase.
Yeah. I think he knows it gets me. I'm like, okay, have a biscuit, have whatever you want.
And how was it when because I had another lady that has children with special needs, which led to do something else, but with yourself, how was it coming to terms and adapting to being a parent with special needs? Being a parent with a child with special needs, how did that change your life?
Yeah.
That's a big question to ask. Sorry if it's too big.
It is big.
Yeah.
And there are lots of parts to it. Some of it is, I guess some of it was, I'm being completely honest. Yeah. I was like, no, I work in a special needs school. Yeah. I kept saying when he learns to talk, he was like 4 at the time. when he learns to talk, he will tell you all. He doesn't have autism. And they're like, he's 4 now and he's not talking. There's a bit of a red flag. So being in the environment, it felt like, but also I feel like there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Because when I would seek support for my child, well, you work in this sector, you know what you're doing. Okay, yeah, I know what I'm doing with other people's children, because guess what? At 4 o'clock, I'm out of the door and somebody else has to deal with it. But I live and breathe this life now.
Yeah.
So part of it was a massive learning curve, and also realizing, I think it helps me connect with parents better, because sometimes I'll say, I know I'm telling you.
Sorry, we have workmen.
That's all good.
Can you hear us?
I can hear that.
What are they? What the?